I was 3 years into palace security work, and in all that time I had never once seen Corporal Aris Thorne move, not when a heckler screamed in his face during the spring parade, not when a wasp landed on his cheek for 11 minutes during the Founders' Day. Review, 11 minutes I counted, because I had nothing better to do that morning, and not, I assumed, for anything short of the building catching fire. That Thursday taught me how wrong I was. The city had been on edge for weeks. 3 unrelated incidents downtown, a suspicious vehicle abandoned outside the exchange, a train platform evacuated over a left bag, a parcel outside the courthouse that turned out to be nothing. None of them connected, officially, none of them claimed by anyone, but everyone on the security detail felt the same low hum underneath it all. Something was wrong somewhere, and nobody could point to it. Briefings that week had gone from routine to clipped, patrol patterns changed twice in 3 days without explanation. So, when the chancellor of a neighboring state arrived for a ceremonial visit that morning, the forecourt held double its usual strength, and every one of us was strung as tight as a watch spring. I'd spent the first hour of my shift doing what we always do on days like that, scanning faces, watching hands, looking for the wrongness that never quite shows up where you expect it. By 9, I'd flagged exactly nothing. A man with too many bags, a woman who kept checking her watch. Both turned out to be nothing, the way it almost always is. By the time the procession route was confirmed and the crowd thickened along the rope, I'd nearly talked myself out of the feeling altogether. Thorne, of course, looked exactly like any other Tuesday. Red tunic, bearskin, white gloves, rifle at the slope, eyes fixed on the far gatehouse like it owed him money. I was 20 feet off his right shoulder, working the crowd line, when I noticed the girl. She was maybe 7, in a yellow coat, standing at the rope with her mother. A few steps away, the mother's attention buried in a phone call. The girl had drifted close to Thorne's post, close enough that her small hand rested against the white glove curled around his rifle. Then she tapped it, once, twice, 3 times. A pause, then again, 3 taps. I almost didn't register it. Kids touch the guards constantly. It's against every rule in the regiment's book, and we let it slide more than we should, because what's the harm? I started easing toward her, ready to gently move her back behind the rope before anyone official noticed. Then I saw Thorne's eyes move. In 3 years, I had never seen his eyes leave that fixed point on the gatehouse, not for the heckler, not for the wasp, not for the time a tourist fainted directly in front of him and had to be carried off by 2 other guards, while Thorne stood over the spot like nothing was happening, but his eyes dropped now, just his eyes. Nothing else in him so much as twitched, down to the girl's hand, to her face. Then, very slowly, out and across the crowd to his left, I followed the line of his gaze and saw nothing. A bench, a family eating from a paper bag, a man in a gray coat checking his watch. Nothing. But Thorne's jaw had set hard, and his eyes did not go back to the gatehouse. I didn't know it yet, but I just watched a man who hadn't moved in 11 years start very quietly to move. His right hand, the one nearer me, resting against the rifle stock, opened slightly, fingers spread then closed. It looked like nothing, a cramp. Except 40 feet away, at the far side of the gate, the guard on that post straightened, almost too slightly to see, the instant Thorne's hand closed. A signal. He had just told another man something, standing dead still, in front of a crowd of 30 phones, without a single one of them catching it. I'd worked that forecourt for 3 years and never known. The guards had a language like that. I found out afterward it wasn't anything written down. It was something Thorne had carried with him from before the ceremonial guard, from 6 years with a mountain reconnaissance unit in terrain, so remote the regiment's own records barely mentioned it. I edged toward the bench his eyes had locked onto, doing my best to look bored. Underneath it, wedged against the bench leg, sat a scuffed black case, the kind you'd use to carry surveying gear or test equipment, except nobody near it was carrying anything, and the family on the bench had only sat down, I'd learn later, about 20 minutes earlier. The case had been there before them. I crouched a few feet off, pretending to check my radio, and ran the numbers in my head the way we're trained to. Nobody had claimed it. Nobody had touched it. And the little girl in the yellow coat was now standing close enough to it that, if I startled the wrong person, she'd be the first thing in the blast radius of any panic that followed, long before anything else was. I didn't run. Running starts things that can't be stopped. I crouched like I was tying a boot and spoke low into my collar mic. South bench, unattended case. Nobody's claiming it. Thorne flagged it. The response came back in 4 words. Copy. Clear it quiet. What happened over the next few minutes was the most extraordinary thing I have ever watched. And almost nobody in that crowd noticed any of it. An usher who hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier appeared at the family's bench and, smiling, told them the best view of the procession was actually from the East Terrace. Would they like to move now, before it filled up? They went, gathering their paper bag, grumbling pleasantly about the walk. 2 more guards rotated into new positions that looked, to anyone watching, like a routine post change, except one of them now stood between the bench and the route the Chancellor's car would take in under 15 minutes. A rope line that had been slack for an hour was suddenly, casually drawn 6 feet tighter, and nobody asked why. And through all of it, Thorn never moved, rifle at the slope, eyes back on the gatehouse, face like carved stone. If you'd looked at him in that moment, and plenty of people did, because they always do, you'd have sworn nothing in the world was happening. The disposal team had the case open, and the area cleared within 11 minutes. 11 minutes is nothing on a clock. And forever when you're standing still, watching a man in a bomb suit kneel over a bench while a state procession idles 2 streets away, and a crowd of families slowly drifts toward an east terrace that suddenly, mysteriously, has the best view in the forecourt. I never got the official report. That's not something that comes down to a security officer. But I heard enough afterward to know it wasn't nothing, and I heard enough to know that if it had sat under that bench another 20 minutes, when the Chancellor's procession would have passed within arm's reach of it, that Thursday would have ended evidently for a great many people. 11 minutes, started by 3 small taps on a white glove. By the time the all clear came through, 1 quiet word in our earpieces, the girl in the yellow coat was crying. Not from fear, I realized, but because her mother had finally looked up from the phone, seen her standing alone at the rope, and was now scolding her in the soft, shaking voice parents use when relief turns sideways into anger. Thorn still hadn't moved, not for any of it. Then a man came through the east gate at a half-run, regimental jacket, a service cane in one hand, moving faster than the cane should have allowed. The girl broke from her mother and ran straight at him, and he caught her up against his chest, the cane clattering away across the cobblestones, and over the top of her yellow hood, his eyes found Thorn, and for the first time since I'd known him, Corporal Eris Thorn's eyes left the gatehouse. He turned his head, fully, deliberately, off the fixed line he had held for 11 years, in front of a crowd, in front of 30 phones, and looked at the man with the cane. The man said 1 word, Thorn. Bramwell, Thorn said back, just that, 1 name. But something moved behind it, in his voice, which I had never once heard do anything but issue the same flat replies to the same idiot questions. Something cracked open, just slightly, like a door left unlatched. I got the rest from Bramwell himself, 20 minutes later, while the forecourt filled back in and the procession rolled past as though the morning had been perfectly ordinary. 6 years ago, on a ridge whose name never made it into any newspaper, a 4-man reconnaissance patrol had been pinned by weather, and worse for the better part of a night. Bramwell had taken a round through the leg early on. Thorn, a junior corporal then, nobody special, had stayed beside him through all of it, and somewhere in those long, cold hours, the 2 of them had invented a signal to keep Bramwell's mind off the pain. 3 taps on the arm, a pause, 3 taps again. It meant, I see something. Don't point. Help is already moving. A private code between 2 men who weren't sure they'd see morning. Bramwell described it to me the way men do when they've decided, finally, that the story is safe to tell. Flat at first, then less flat. He said Thorn had kept tapping it against his arm for hours, long after there was nothing left to signal, just to give him something steady to count. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, over and over, until the cold and the waiting stopped mattering quite so much. Then the patrol that found them came up the same ridge at first light, and neither man had spoken of it since, not to each other, not to anyone. Bramwell had made it home. Thorn had gone on to the ceremonial guard and never spoken of the ridge again. And 6 months ago, Bramwell, medically retired now, raising his daughter alone since his wife passed, had taught the signal to the one person he trusted to find a friendly uniform in any crowd, his daughter as a game, in case she ever got separated from him. She does it to every guard she sees, Bramwell told me, laughing the kind of laugh that's mostly relief. Every single one, since she was 4. It's never meant a thing before, not once. He'd had no idea his old corporal stood post at this exact gate. Neither had Thorn, until a small hand, 3 years too young to know what it was repeating, tapped a white glove and was, for the first time in 11 years, answered. Thorn knelt then, actually knelt, on the cobblestones, bearskin and rifle and all, in front of the whole returning crowd, and said something to the girl that I couldn't hear from where I stood. She nodded back at him very seriously, the way children do when they've been told something they understand is important, even if they can't say why. Then he stood, settled the rifle back against his shoulder, and returned to his line. By the time the Chancellor's car passed 2 minutes later, Thorn was exactly where he had always been, eyes forward, face stone, not a hair out of place. If you'd arrived 60 seconds after it happened, you would never have known anything at all had taken place on that forecourt. I've worked that gate for 3 more years since. I've watched Thorn stand through driving rain, through a guard beside him fainting dead away mid-shift, through every kind of provocation this city can throw at a man who isn't allowed to react. He has never broken formation again. Not once, exactly as the regiment requires of him. I asked him about it, once, months later, on a slow shift when the forecourt was empty, and the rain had driven even the pigeons off the cobblestones. I asked him how he'd known, not about the case, but the signal itself, 3 taps from a child too young to have learned it anywhere but from her, father's hands. He didn't look at me, eyes on the gatehouse, same as always. You don't forget a thing like that, he said, not even after 11 years of standing still. It was the longest sentence I ever heard him say off-duty, and the last time we spoke of it, except for those 11 seconds out of 11 years of service, when Corporal Aris Thorn turned his head, knelt on the stones, and let a 7-year-old girl in a yellow coat see that the statue in front of her was a man who remembered. Nobody filmed it. The 30 phones pointed his way that morning were all aimed at the procession by the time it mattered. But I was standing right there, 20 feet off his shoulder, and I will never forget the sound of 3 small taps on a white glove, and a man who hadn't moved in 11 years, moving at last.